The Addams Family Chronicles continue. Chapter 26. Must You Betray Me with a Kiss? Young Eric was 11 years old in June of 1972. He crouched behind the aluminum building at the Waurika Country Club, with tears running unabated down both sides of his face. The western afternoon sun was pounding down, evaporating the tears almost as soon as they had fallen from his cheeks. He was crying because his heart was breaking. Breaking because he'd just seen his girlfriend, Sandra Richardson, kissing Billy Anthony in the country club swimming pool. As he lifted his gaze heavenward for inspiration, the sun filtered through his tear-stained eyelashes, causing kaleidoscopic starbursts to dance across his retina, and momentarily causing his attention to shift away from the source of his anguish. In the midst of this brief moment, his mind floated on the ether to a place where all memories survive, back to a time when things were simple, before he discovered the perils of romantic love. 7 years earlier. Mom had a doll named Cindy, of which she was very proud, and she kept it in a cedar chest where she kept all of her most prized possessions. Although she had had it for some time, the doll appeared as though it were brand new. It was certainly lifelike, with blue eyes, reddish blonde hair, and a beautiful red and white dress. And because Mom held this doll in such high regard as to keep it in a cedar chest, it only made the doll more intriguing to 4-year-old Eric. Whether he was drawn to it because he knew his mother was fond of it, or because he thought the doll was beautiful, he knew that he wanted the doll, and began thinking of ways to play with her without Mom knowing. The attraction to the doll was a strange new feeling for young Eric. He didn't understand the craving, nor did he try to. It was a dynamic force that drove him, like that of a salmon swimming miles and miles upstream, not knowing where he was going, only knowing that he must get there. It was a feeling older than man, capable of launching 1,000 ships into battle. It was a feeling written about by countless bereft souls and jilted poets, who pined away their lives in search of the very thing that young Eric was on the threshold of discovering. Rudimentary though it was, Eric was in love with a doll named Cindy. Now, 4-year-olds are under constant parental supervision, so scheduling a secret rendezvous with a doll can be tricky. But as luck would have it, his 5-month-old sister, Alicia, required a lot of Mom's attention. This created the perfect opportunity for young Eric and Cindy to be together. Although the lid to the cedar chest was heavy, it presented a minor obstacle to their love. And the moment he slipped Cindy out of her prison, they eloped underneath the bed and held each other tight. The clandestine nature of their relationship served to fuel his desire, and he kissed Cindy with all the passion and excitement that he knew. Cindy's expression never changed. Meanwhile, in the other room, Mom had just finished changing Alicia's diaper. The two of them were enjoying a game of patty cake. When they rolled it up and threw it in the pan, it elicited a full-throttle laugh from Alicia. Mom so enjoyed having a daughter. She had waited 10 years for just such a moment, having endured 3 previous pregnancies that had all resulted in baby boys. Occasions such as these were bond-building opportunities, and she knew from experience how quickly Alicia would outgrow her. These were moments to remember and cherish, and as she realized the importance of this very instant, sentimental tears filled the banks of her eyelids, and she pulled Alicia up and hugged her tight against her bosom. As the wave of her emotion ebbed, a suspicious silence invaded the house. It was the kind of deafening stillness that sounded alarms and beckoned investigation. Mom walked stealthily toward the other room, careful to disguise her presence, as if hoping to catch a felony in progress. Alicia, too, was inordinately quiet, obviously sensing Mom's uneasiness. They entered the room where young Eric and Cindy were hiding. He saw Mom's feet as he peered out from underneath the bunk bed, but he didn't make a move. Suddenly, he was overcome with guilt and shame, as if he were doing something salacious and covert. Mom looked around the room, now becoming a bit disquieted by Eric's unauthorized absence. She decided to break the hush and nervously called out his name. "Eric? Where are you?" She said it loud enough that anyone could have heard it throughout the small farmhouse. Still, the silence persisted. Eric remained motionless as he held Cindy tightly, his breaths quick and shallow, hoping to avoid detection. But Mom's resolve waxed as her patience waned, and she repeated her query more boldly, with emphasis and without question. "Eric, come here." The words lingered in the air for a few seconds without any response. Fear now was the only thing compelling young Eric. The fear of being caught versus the fear of punishment. A difficult choice at best. A few more long seconds passed slowly. But finally, just as Mom was about to turn and search the house, young Eric crawled out from under the bed with Cindy trailing behind. Guilt was written indelibly on his face as he stood awaiting her judgment. Mom stood there assessing the situation, ignorant and oblivious of the reasons for Eric's reticence. "Why didn't you answer me when I called you? Why do you have Cindy out of the cedar chest? Please don't play with her without my permission." Mom grabbed up the doll with her free hand and placed it back into the chest while holding the lid up with her leg. Eric mumbled meekly as he watched Cindy disappear behind the cedar veneer. Though their tryst had been short-lived, the memories of his playmate under the bed would serve as a comparative reference point for all romantic interests that followed in his life. Almost 3 years passed, and young Eric found himself nearing the end of his first year in school. Being in first grade introduced him to others of his own age and helped him to foster social relationships other than those of his nuclear family. It was a chance to learn how he fit into the culture he now called his own. And it was an opportunity to learn about the opposite sex. He first liked Kim Abernathy, but it was more about familiarity than attraction. By virtue of her last name, they were seated next to each other alphabetically. He also liked Ruth Elliott, but it was more about curiosity. She always wore dresses to school, and during nap time each day after lunch, young Eric would orient his mat in a position to where he could see up her dress. This only led to more questions than answers. But the girl he really liked was Rebecca Arp, who was the principal's daughter. She had dark eyes and dark hair, and a sprightly demeanor that was more provocative than playful. Sometimes she was downright saucy, but he viewed her impetuous nature as an asset, and it only served to make her more attractive. He often tried to play with her at recess, but she always seemed uninterested, more content to chase after Stephen Kirby, who was one of the more popular boys in the class. So on the very last day of the school year, young Eric decided to hang around after school. It was quite different, with no students there, and a bit spooky in the deserted hallways and classrooms. As he made his way down to his homeroom class, he heard someone. To his amazement, it was Rebecca, putting the chalkboard erasers in a large coffee can, preparing to take them outside for dusting. She looked up, a bit startled at first, but when she saw who it was, she played it cool. "What you doing?" Eric asked the question, but he knew the answer. Just a simple conversation starter. "I'm minding my own business." She was smug to say the least, but this was the very thing that intrigued him. She continued placing the erasers in the can without looking at him. "You're going to dust the erasers? Can I help?" He was looking for any way possible just to spend some time with her. "No, you can't. Miss Shackelford said that I could do it." She finished putting the erasers in the can and headed out of the classroom. Eric surveyed the situation rather quickly, and without any warning, flung his arms around Rebecca from behind and kissed her on the back of the head. She dropped the can of erasers as she broke free and spun around to confront him. "What are you doing? I'm going to tell Mrs. Shackelford you're going to be in big trouble." Her nostrils flared and steam billowed from her ears as she yelled at him. A cold stare followed before she ran out of the room. This was not the reaction Eric was looking for, nor was it a reaction that he had expected. As that moment unfolded, his excitement turned quickly to fear, and he bolted from the schoolhouse in a full run until he reached the safe haven of the family trailer house across the street. He hid in back, looking expectantly toward the schoolhouse for 30 minutes or longer, but no one followed him. Perhaps she didn't tattle on him. Maybe she liked it after all. Maybe she was just too afraid to say so. Whatever was the case, he never saw Rebecca Arp again. The stinging heat on the soles of his feet from the hot sidewalk behind the aluminum building at the country club brought reality back into focus for young Eric. He'd been hiding and crying there for at least 15 minutes, wondering why Sandra was kissing Billy Anthony. Not only was she kissing him, it was in front of everybody at the pool. She didn't even try to hide it. It was as if she wanted everyone to see her kissing Billy Anthony. It was all so confusing, but mostly it was humiliating. As he pondered the reasons why, he pictured an airplane above the town writing "Sandra plus Billy" in white smoke across a clear blue sky, while a deep booming voice comes on the loudspeaker announcing,
"Attention, ladies and gentlemen. Sandra loves Billy now, not Eric. I repeat, Sandra does not love Eric, only Billy. Thank you."
Then he imagined the next day's newspaper headline in bold 2-inch type reading, "Sandra dumps Eric in country club pool." He wiped his eyes and got up to start the long walk home. Along the way, he did his best to piece together his feelings about what had happened that day. He wished he had not seen them together. He wished a lot of things at that moment. But more than anything, he wished he had kissed Sandra himself. Chapter 27. Disrespect in a Florida Motel. It was a scene plucked straight from a documentary on bad parenting, in a cheap motel somewhere on the central coast of Florida in June of 1973. On display, a battle of wills between an autocratic father and a spiteful child. In retrospect, the event was more of an anomaly than it was the norm, and perhaps that is precisely why it's remembered. There was a bitter sweetness that hung inside the car as the Adams family began their journey homeward from a 2-week summer trip to Florida. This would be their last vacation together as a family unit, for Lynn had just graduated from high school and would be moving off to college in the fall. The unusual silence that had settled over them had persisted for a while, each lost in their own thoughts and musings, mostly about what they had seen and done over the past 2 weeks. The trip had taken them to several parts of the state, but the bulk of their time had been spent swimming at the motel pool or snorkeling in the emerald surf that licked at the sandy, sun-kissed beaches of the Gulf. The children marveled at the variety of beautiful shells that littered the shore, and each stroll down the beach promised a bounty of new treasures to be discovered and cherished. They had seen lots of new things: crabs and starfish, coconut trees and lemon trees, seagulls and sailboats. But now they were driving back home to face the remainder of a hot, windy, predictable summer in southwestern Oklahoma. The tires of the family sedan on the concrete sections of highway struck a rhythmic cadence as they traveled west across the Florida Panhandle. White puffy clouds appeared in the late afternoon sky, and virtually unnoticed, gathered menacingly in dark, stormy masses. Keith looked up from his comic book, suddenly uneasy about the approaching weather. Before he could utter a sound, a blinding flash of lightning struck the car, and an almost simultaneous thunderclap of deafening proportions followed. In the next instant, the clouds opened, and a furious, torrential rain began pelting the car, infusing new life into the startled conversation. "What the hell was that? Did I have a blowout?" Dad excitedly jerked the steering wheel and applied the brake, causing the vehicle to swerve slightly. His wide-eyed expression suggested that he had been asleep at the wheel, or that he'd been hypnotized by the tedium required of long-distance driving. Either way, it was obvious he had no awareness of what had just happened. He regained his composure slowly, as if awaking from a night terror. Keith eagerly interjected, "I think lightning just struck the car." Everybody but Dad shook their head in agreement, figuring that a strike so close and bright surely would have killed them all had they not been riding in a car. Dad fumbled with the buttons on the instrument panel, attempting to start the windshield wipers. Finally, they clicked on, and with the first swipe of the blades, the road became visible again. "Are you sure? I really thought we had a blowout." His tone softened as he settled down. "Maybe we should go ahead and stop for the night. What do you all think?" As he spoke, they came upon a sign that pointed to Pensacola, and Dad pulled the car into a Howard Johnson's motel just off the highway. As he cut off the engine, the rain stopped and the clouds rolled away, just as quickly as they had arrived. The kids all jumped out, anxious to don their swimsuits as they walked by the inviting pool on the way to their room. It didn't take the kids 5 minutes to change, leaving Mom and Dad alone to enjoy a much-needed cocktail. When the Hunger kids returned from the swimming pool 2 hours later, Mom and Dad seemed a bit fresher, as the alcoholic drinks had served to blunt the edge from the afternoon's monotonous travel. Mom got up and pulled some bologna and mayonnaise from the ice chest and placed them on the counter next to a half-squashed loaf of white bread. There was half a bag each of potato chips and corn chips that Mom had saved from the roadside picnic lunch earlier in the day, along with some mushy bananas. Mom was very frugal, and it was against her nature to waste or spend more money than was necessary for anything. This was evidenced by the food that was on display for their consumption at this very meal. The bologna was not Oscar Mayer, but Surefine brand. The chips were not Lay's or Fritos, but good value. The mayonnaise was Griffin's, not Kraft's or Hellman's. The bananas were very ripe, more brown than yellow, sold at deep discount just so the store owner could get rid of them. The only brand name was Wonder on the half-squashed loaf of bread. Perhaps she had purchased the brand name loaf because it had been damaged at the store and discounted below the price of the generic loaves. Yes, she was frugal, but it was this very trait that kept her children from hunger during the lean times and taught them the value of money. The kids really didn't care about the brands anyway, for they had no other standard by which to judge. Young Eric reached his arm across Alicia to grab a couple of slices of the misshapen bread, then lunged for the plastic knife, snatching it just before Lynn could take it first. When Lynn realized that Eric had gotten to it first, he tried to disguise his wanting the knife at all by going for the bag of potato chips, gaining a measure of satisfaction in knowing Eric's dislike for corn chips. Eric plunged the knife deep into the Griffin's mayonnaise and lathered both pieces of the bread that were in front of him, then continued the psychological warfare with Lynn by sloppily licking the knife before planting it back into the jar of mayonnaise. Lynn pretended not to notice at all as he scraped more chips onto his plate, leaving only a few crumbs in the bottom of the bag for anyone else. This was just enough to tip the battle in his favor. "Mom, Look, Lynn took all the potato chips. He knows I don't like corn chips. That's not fair. Tears of anger began to well in young Eric's eyes as he complained. Lynn remained stoic, but Eric's outburst was just the emotional response Lynn had sought. And in his reticence, he reveled, knowing that he had won again. Mom pulled a jar from the ice chest, hoping to pacify Eric with a pickle, but he rejected it straight away as he chomped down angrily on his mayonnaise sandwich. He sulked through most of the meal, bypassing the mushy banana and finishing before anyone else. He got up and sat on the foot of the bed where Dad was reclining with his drink, watching the evening news. Eric sat and stared at the television, motionless, pretending to watch the program in front of him that he cared nothing about, hoping to deflect any unwanted attention from flowing in his direction. Unfortunately, Dad didn't pick up these vibes from young Eric, as he began playfully kneading Eric's bare back with his toes. It didn't take long for Eric to reject Dad's advances, and he reached behind him and pushed Dad's feet off his back. "Stop it, Dad." It was a matter-of-fact refusal without emotion. Mom glanced over at them from across the room. Eric continued to pretend to watch the television. "Stop what?" Dad paused a moment, then began kneading his back again, prompting Eric to slap Dad's feet aside, this time more forcefully. His voice was more emotional. "Dad, stop! Stop touching my back with your feet." He looked in Dad's direction, though he didn't make eye contact. He scooted over, hoping to put a bit of distance between himself and Dad's feet, still staring straight ahead, hoping the one-sided game was now over. But it was just beginning. "I'm just playing. I'm just showing you some love. Don't you want to play?" Dad chuckled as he said it, perhaps at Eric's heightened irritation and foul mood. He reached his foot out again to touch Eric's back, but it proved to be just out of his reach. Eric witnessed the attempt out of the corner of his eye, but remained motionless, trying not to let Dad know he noticed it all. Dad laughed again, mostly at Eric's transparency. Mom had stopped eating, looking on a bit anxiously, now fully aware of the heightening drama. Dad scooted down quickly and once again touched his feet to Eric's back. This time, Eric jumped up angrily, grabbing the toes and twisting them as he forced Dad's feet away from him with such vigor that it made Dad wince. "Stop it! Stop it, you son of a bitch!" As young Eric vomited these harsh, foreign words at his father, he suddenly realized there was no way to take them back. The moment for submission had passed, and he would now bear the full brunt of Dad's cruel wrath alone. The whole family sat transfixed, watching uneasily in real time as they beheld the unfolding tragedy playing out before them. Dad rose swiftly, grabbing young Eric sternly by the arm. His playful countenance had been supplanted by an expression of ruthless anger. Eric tried to withdraw from his grasp, but to no avail. Dad raised his open hand, plunged it sharply down across young Eric's left cheek with unbridled vengeance, then followed with a backhand stroke across the other side of his face. A third blow found his left cheek again, then another backhand, as his torrential fury rained down upon his disobedient son. It was too much for Mom to bear. She interjected bravely, with a somewhat meek and nervous voice. "Now, Warren, please," Mom pleaded, hoping to spare Eric from more of his brutality. "You want some too?" Dad raised his hand toward Mom, but she didn't flinch. Tears filled young Eric's eyes as he absorbed the moment. The sting of the blows was beginning to take hold, but it was the painful conflict with his father that hurt him the most. Dad turned his full scrutiny back to Eric. Their eyes locked together coldly for a second, then two, then three, until finally Eric broke, and angry tears flooded down his cheeks like never before. He pulled free from Dad's grasp and bolted to the bathroom, locking the door behind him, and he cried for more than an hour. He didn't come out of that bathroom all night. But somewhere in the darkness, when he awoke on the cold tile floor, he thought about coming out, but the anger over the events of that night wouldn't allow it. Even when the morning came, rejoining his family was one of the hardest things he'd ever done. But the first person that spoke to him was his father. "Eric, I hope you can forgive me for last night. I was wrong for the way I treated you. I love you. I wish I could take everything back, but I can't. I just want you to know that I love you and that I'm sorry and that I'll never do that again." And he didn't.